Hello, everyone, and welcome to PCI Webinars. Today's webinar, One Step at a Time, promoting walking, literacy, and community engagement through outdoor programming, with our speakers, Dr. Noah Lenstra and Emily Nanney. Dr. Lenstra is an assistant professor of library and information science at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, where he directs Let's Move in Libraries. He is the author of Healthy Living at the Library, which was published in 2020 through Libraries Unlimited, and received, with colleagues from Wayne State and the University of Oklahoma, a 3-year grant from the IMLS to study how small and rural public libraries address health and wellness through public programs. He is a member of the Public Library Association's Promoting Healthy Communities Advisory Group and blogs for ALA's Public Programs Office. Emily Nanney has worked in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library for over 21 years. She is currently the education leader, providing strategic oversight for programming and educational partnerships. She's done that since October of 2018. Emily previously held positions in children's services, including coordinator, manager, and librarian. She is a 2018 Randolph-Collicott Selection Committee member, served as a member of the 2015 Public Library Association Leadership Academy, was the team lead for the Association for Library Service to Children Institute, and project coordinator for the Library Services and Technology Act Storywalk Grant in fiscal year 18, and a project manager of the PNC Financial Education Initiative from 2013 to 2015 for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. Emily has a Master of Library and Information Science from the University of South Carolina and a Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education from UNC Charlotte. Coming to you now, it is Dr. Noah Lenstra and Emily Nanney.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. Since we have a small group here, hopefully we'll be able to get a good conversation going. And if you have questions at any point, please do feel free to use that question box. We really want to hear from you and to make sure that you get out of this webinar whatever you came here to get. So please do see this as an interactive webinar. And on that note, I see Rachel from Bradenton has introduced herself. So if you would, just as we're going through this preliminary part, just put in the question box just who you are and where you're from. We'd love to know who we're talking with today. So for this hour, we are talking about how we in our libraries can promote walking, literacy, and community engagement through outdoor programming. And so after a short introduction, Emily will be sharing her story walk story at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. And then I will talk about some other quick and easy ways you can start promoting walking, literacy, and outdoor community engagement at your library, and why that programming is especially important during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for open discussion and question and answer. But again, don't feel like you have to wait to the end for a question. We'd invite you all to speak up at any point. And so just a few preliminary remarks. Why would libraries be doing things relating to walking? And I think it's no surprise that we have a lot of health issues in America, and one of them is caused by our increasingly sedentary societies. We don't walk, and we're not as physically active in our day-to-day lives as perhaps we were in earlier generations, based on kind of changes in the workforce, changes in our lifestyles. And so I think increasingly we in librarianship really realize that that health and public health is something that we could help to promote. And I always love sharing this example of Nancy Pearl. who is America's action figure librarian. You've probably seen that before. But a few years ago, she started combining her two greatest pleasures, reading and walking, by doing much of her reading in the form of audiobooks that she listens to while she walks. And she says, if I don't walk, it's really not a great day. So increasingly, librarians are championing walking and sharing their love of walking with the communities that they serve. Another reason why this is important is we also experience, many of us experience, and children in particular in urban areas experience what is called nature deficit disorder. And there's a lot of negative health outcomes associated with not having access to green space, not having access to parks, and not being exposed to those spaces in everyday life. And I include this image of Gritty here because everyone's probably seen that Snickers commercial where people are kind of losing their minds, and then they bite into a Snickers and suddenly all is right with the world. Well, it's the same with nature. We increasingly we know in the health literature that if people don't have access to nature, they become stir crazy. They kind of get a little bit like Gritty. And so we need to go outside to recharge, and librarians increasingly are stepping up to try to find ways to promote outdoor engagement, whether they're using their own spaces or adjacent spaces to get people outside and to tap in. And then just one final idea I want to share with you before I turn things over to Emily is this concept from Norway called friluftsliv, which is, you can think of it as the outdoor equivalent of hygge, which many of you are probably familiar with, which is hygge is kind of cozy indoor living, and friluftsliv is open air living, the idea that we can be outside and we can be comfortable in all forms of weather, and really promoting the idea that it doesn't have to be just a beautiful day to be outside and to tap into the benefits of nature. We can find ways to be outside and enjoy outdoor living in all types of weather. And so there's a great article here in the National Geographic, but it's especially during the COVID-19 pandemic with so many people working from home, it's become a concept that has really captured the attention of many, including us here in librarianship. So I just wanted to start with just some preliminary remarks about why this is important before I turn things over to Emily, who will share her story developing story walk programming at the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. So Emily, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time this afternoon. I just wanted to point out on the slide, the image at the top, that's a graphic that our marketing and communication department created for story walks. So we use that on all our promotional materials. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about Charlotte, North Carolina, the county that I'm in and serve. So we're the largest county in the state of North Carolina, and we've had over 339,000 people as active library card holders, meaning they've used their account within the past 2 years. Prior to COVID, we did tons of in-person, mainly in-person programs, over 29,000 in a fiscal year. We still are doing tons of programs since March of 2020. All of our programs have been virtual, and we're probably at 15% of what we did in fiscal year 19 online, but we're still being very strategic and getting lots of turnout for our virtual programs. And we have 20 library locations. The image on the bottom left corner is our main library in Uptown Charlotte, which is actually will be torn down this fall. And our new main library will be up in about 3 years. And on the right-hand side, that picture is a picture of Imaginon, which is our flagship building for teen and children, and it's shared with Children's Theater of Charlotte. Next slide, please. So what are story walks? You may be familiar, but just to give you a little bit of background information, They're opportunities for children and families to enjoy two great things: reading and outdoor spaces. A story walk is literally taking apart a picture book, placing each laminated page in a weather-protected frame, and placing those frames in an outdoor space so that children and families, or really anyone, can enjoy books in an outdoor setting. So you can use story walks for, some systems do poetry walks, or some maybe display student artwork, or have things directed just towards adults. But in our library system, we had a grant, and so we are focused on children birth to 12 and their families who enjoy story walks. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of background information, we were by no means the first library system in our state or in the nation to create a story walk. In fact, Ann Ferguson of Montpelier, Vermont, developed story walks along with Rachel Senegal of Hubbard Public Library. But even in North Carolina, there were other library systems that had story walks. Our unique spin was we wanted to, in our proposal to the state library and the LSTA grant, we wanted to propose having story walks at 3 inner city parks that are not near physical library locations. And many of the families do not have lots of books in the home. We also have a partnership with Reed Charlotte, who is actually housed out of our main library. They came to town in 2015 with the goal for the whole community of moving literacy. So at that time, 39% of third graders at the end of third grade were on reading level, and their goal is by 2025 for 80% of children in Mecklenburg County to be on grade level in reading. So we wanted to use active reading techniques in our story walk, which is asking questions, building vocabulary, and connecting to the child's world. So each of our story walks includes tips and questions on each page in an active reading format. Prior to applying for the grant, we had been researching and attending other programs through our state library about story walks. And one of our branch locations has an outdoor garden, and the children's librarian there decided to do a temporary story walk. And it was just done with like garage sale signs and stakes, put out for a couple hours once a week after every story time. She actually even included some interactive activities, whether it be coloring or things that we don't have in a traditional story walk at each little place, since the garden was pretty small. She received lots of great feedback. She presented at a children's services meeting. And as a result, even before we got our permanent story walk, several locations got really excited. Our Imagine On location has frames up that they just purchased on their walls, where they will have a story walk related to a book that maybe Children's Theater is doing as a play. And then we got a collection of some laminated stories that some of our locations just put up inside the walls in their children's space. They just wanted to do an indoor story walk. So those are temporary. And even during COVID this past summer, one of our librarians was asked to put a temporary story walk outside a hospital where families might be walking or participating in other activities, something they could do from the car. So those are all things that had happened. And the one during COVID, of course, was after our permanent story walks, but we had just done some research. We partner with Parks and Recreation. We are in a county, so there's a Parks and Recreation department for the city, and then we also partner with a couple of towns, and so it's actually 3 different Parks and Recreation partners that we have. And we purchased our posts and frames from Barking Dog Exhibits, There's several vendors now. I had researched barking dog exhibits. I got to see them at ALA, I think in the summer of like 2017. And so I got to talk to them ahead of receiving the grant and just said, hey, there's a possibility we might get a grant. We're wanting to put in approximately 5 story walks, 3 to 5 story walks. Do you have enough material on hand? So it was kind of nice to give them a heads up that that might be coming. And also, just going back a minute, when working with Parks and Rec, we just did a verbal agreement. We talked to them prior to getting the grant to find out if they could help us. We knew that we would not be able to, we didn't have the capacity to actually install the posts and frames. We could pay for them and maintain them, but we needed their help with that. So we talked to them about that. And I would recommend getting an MOU. We just did a verbal agreement, but one of our parks has had to change. So it doesn't hurt to get anything in writing if you can. Just wanted to share that tip. Next slide, please. So we put in our proposal. We obviously got the grant fall of 2017 or beginning of that fiscal year. And we had put that we wanted to be able to track statistics, and we'll talk about that more. But we wanted to have like guaranteed audiences. So we proposed that we would do ribbon cuttings and celebrations at all of the parks. We had planned to just have 3 story walks in 3 parks, but as we were moving through using the grant money, we realized that we would have extra money. So we went back to the state library and they gave us permission to add 2 additional story walks in. The 3 ones that we started with in inner city parks, we strategically placed that those parks were right near preschool centers and elementary schools that use the park as their playground. So we had guaranteed audiences for our ribbon cuttings and celebrations. We, of course, invited the whole community, but we could invite classes or different grade levels and preschool so that could walk down to the story walk. So that gave us guaranteed audience and was really exciting. So you'll see listed below where we have our 5 parks. Our newest park, Jack Hughes Park, we just this past year switched. It's in one of our towns, Pineville. We had another inner city park, and they were going through major renovations and reconstructions, and so we had to actually move that story walk. So we have 2 in the town of Pineville, 1 in the town of Matthews, and then 2 at inner city parks currently, but all within Mecklenburg County. Next slide, please. So just to give you some more information about when we did a kickoff for celebration, we included leadership. So our library director, some of our other associate library directors were there, as well as children's staff, myself, and others. And we asked our library director to just do a really brief speech and ribbon cutting because, again, you know, we're standing in front of 120 kindergartners or first graders, and they don't have a long attention span. But it was really great to involve leadership to get their buy-in, have them invite partners if they were able. Park and Rec was there. We invited Reed Charlotte. And then whenever we could, we included children's authors. So on the right side picture at the bottom, you'll notice Matt De La Pena. He was there for Community Read. A couple of years ago, we featured his book, Love. We've also had Tony DiTerlizzi, who was in town working with the Mint Museum, and we were able to have him for a story walk. So it doesn't always work out, but whenever we can have an author, we'd love to do that. We actually have Community Read virtually this March. So we're doing a virtual story walk where, of course, families can be at the park, but we're going to have one of a mascot from the Charlotte Panthers with a library staff member recording going through the story walk that we can share virtually with families. So we've adjusted because of the pandemic, but we still wanted to, Serper is actually, you know, a mascot for the Panthers and someone that children would know. Also in our celebrations, as I said, we have a ribbon cutting, which is a lot of fun. We talk to children about what a ribbon cutting is, and we have literacy and movement stations. So we'll have a story time, a story walk, we'll have art activities. You see children are painting a heart on that picture below related to Matt's De La Pena's love book. Sometimes we'll have chalk drawings or other craft activities that relate to activities in the book. The left side photo I wanted to show you is we celebrated Engage 2020 in our library system this past year, and it was related to voting and civic action, but we just wanted to have books related to that this past fall, and so we had an Engage 2020 grant for our whole library system about women's rights to vote. And so Story Walk was a piece of that. So whenever we can feature Story Walks around large system initiative, whether it's STEAM Month, Community Read, summer break, we always try to do that. Next slide, please. We have had some challenges. We've definitely learned a lot. We had never done story walks before. We got our grant. We did talk to other library systems, but we definitely learned a lot of lessons in that first year. So to share some of those, directions come for installing posts and frames. Unfortunately, when Parks and Rec installed them, each frame has drainage holes, so when it rains, the water will drain out. They installed the frames backwards, so the drainage holes were at the top. So sometimes rain got in, which wasn't a huge issue because we had laminated the pages. However, in Charlotte, we do have cold days in the winter. So there were times in the winter when it was 30 or 20, and we went out to the park to change the story, and it had frozen. So we had to wait for warmer days. So I would definitely encourage to make sure the drainage holes are facing down. Plexiglass, also we learned about from the company. They had suggested that you use 2 pieces of plexi, one under the laminated page and one over inside the frame. That made a really tight fit because we were using very heavy laminate, which I do recommend very heavy laminate, like 10 millimeters or more. It's expensive, but it really helps your story last and keep from getting damaged by the weather, at least rain. But we had to move to 1 plexiglass, so we learned about that. We did have one park with some vandalism, an inner city park. And so Park and Rec was great to work with us to put in new posts and frames. I would definitely recommend ordering extra posts and frames if that might be an issue. We've only had that at one park, but that's just something to be aware of. So if you can afford it, I'd make sure that you order some extra pieces. We also worked with the community. There's a community center there, a police department in that area, just to help them kind of keep an eye out and watch the posts and frames, just to be aware in case there was vandalism. I mentioned before about the laminate. It costs, because we get the heavy laminate, it costs us about $300 to do a 20-page. We have 20 posts and frames at every location, so it's about $300 to laminate every story. But we use those stories for about 6 months at a couple different parks until they get faded. So it's definitely worth the money for us. We also had planned originally to change out our stories every month, but we realized how time intensive it is to take a story apart, put it together, add questions. We had a team. Also, like I said, we have 5 parks. So we moved to changing them out every quarter. Now we've kind of learned, as we've got a system and more staff helping, that we do try to change them out every couple of months again. But you have to kind of just find out your rhythm. It's definitely hard to our goal of changing them out every month was very ambitious. And you definitely need to figure out how much time it's going to take to develop your storyboards, whether it's one person doing it, a team of people, just to take those kind of things in consideration. Next slide, please. So we also had to think about assessments, especially for our grant, because usually you have to share not only stories of impact, but maybe statistics or outputs or long-range outcomes. And with not being able to be at 5 parks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we wanted to figure out how we could capture some statistics. So as I mentioned before, we had, a set number of ribbon cuttings and celebrations the first year. We did so a ribbon cutting and a celebration. So 2 events at every Story Walks the first year, so we could report on those statistics with guaranteed audiences. And we continue to have celebrations and things, but we count those numbers. We do have a survey at the end of our Story Walk. It's close to one of the last posts or frames. Like here, you'll see examples. We put them on post 18 of 20. So we do have some families that will take the survey right there using the bit.ly link. Also, we do see a high increase when we change out a story that families will take the survey. And we have had random requests throughout the years for other parks that want Story Walks or want an additional one, or other people in the county and different areas want Story Walks. So we know they're popular. We also include, as part of our summer learning challenge, an activity they could do is visiting a Story Walk, participating in one. We now use Beanstack for summer learning, and so that activity is included on there. For the grant, we had some extra money for marketing. So we had a billboard, which you'll see later on a slide, promoting those Story Walks near those neighborhoods. We have a page on our library website to promote Story Walks. Marketing promoted on Facebook as well for us. We even have, I don't have a picture for you today, but outside of our Imagine on Location, we have a huge, fairly new electronic board that promotes programs, and so we were able to promote Story Walks that day as well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to mention again our partners. I talked about Read Charlotte. They're a huge partner for us. We use active reading questions and techniques. And so we definitely consider them one of our partners. We do use one of our posts and frames in each of our Story Walks to acknowledge our partners. You'll see below the logos, Mecklenburg County Parks and Recreation, Pineville Parks and Recreation, and the Town of Matthews Recreation and Cultural Resource are included there, as well as we received the grant from the state library. So there's information text about that being acknowledged, as well as we have a library foundation that helped us apply for the grant. So our library and our library foundation are included as well. Next slide, please. So I definitely encourage you to have a team of library staff. We planned out that Story Walks would be permanent for us, and so we hope to have them for the foreseeable future, at least hopefully 8 to 10 years out. And so it really is helpful to have a team that can help you figure out, okay, what kind of books are we going to choose? What initiatives are we going to have Story Walks in? We need help creating the storyboards. We go out in pairs to change them. Occasionally someone has gone out by themselves, but we do it just for safety. Encourage people to go out in pairs to change out storyboards. And also, like, just continuously library staff kind of maintain supplies, make sure that we have enough poster board and enough questions. They work on questions ahead, book selection, and things like that, photos. And we have a lead person as well that's now leading story walks. And then again, like I said, just incorporating in large scale planning and initiatives, as well as smaller events. And I think the system is really aware and used to us having story walks, because anytime there's a new initiative, hey, can we do that as a children's activity for this initiative? So just really getting the whole library staff excited, not just children's staff. Next slide, please. So also for the grant, we were able to purchase some extra things, and we purchased in pretty large quantities, so we'd have them after the grant funds ran out. We have stickers that says I'm a story walker with our logo, Story Walk logo on them. So any children or families that come to our big events or kickoffs, they all get a sticker. They're great to include in promotional photos and things like that. So we purchased a lot of those. Rack cards, those are really nice, high quality, that we have at all of our locations. They list all the parks on them. We update them when we changed a park. We leave those at some of the parks that have indoor spaces as well, so they can help with promoting them. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see an example of one of our billboards for story walks. So we had those in various areas of the county. And though we don't know how many people exactly looked at those billboards, we can get from the city statistics of how many people drive by a road on a certain day or a week or throughout the month. And so that gives us some informal statistics of who might at least be aware of story walks. We can't guarantee they read the billboard, but we at least have an idea of who went by. We share information with our partners, so they promote on social media. We do. Pineville is a wonderful park for us, and they promote on their Facebook page and in their town. And again, we have that bit.ly link, the survey, and we try to send those out, especially to the schools and preschools when they come, so we can get lots of responses. Next slide, please. So you'll have access to this whole presentation, and you can go on and actually see some of our activities and events for our celebrations and kickoffs. You'll see a couple of staff members there that are actually on our kickoff days in groups reading and doing the story walk with children. And so you just get an idea of different activities that you can do. So I'll ask if anybody has any questions, or feel free to ask later. I think we'll do questions as well at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, that's right, Emily. So, but before we move on, I just wanted to take a moment here to check in. We'd love to hear if you've done story walks at your library, or if you have any questions for Emily. So we'll just take a moment and check in and see how people are doing and what thoughts you may have at this point in the webinar. Oh, so we have a question here. Rachel says, I have never tried them. I've suggested them, but we are so understaffed that I don't see them happening anytime soon. And yeah, so I certainly emphasize with that, Rachel. And I'll make a quick plug here. So if you search for Curiosity City Story Walk, so Curiosity City Story Walk, they're actually a nonprofit based in Portland, Maine, and they've actually worked with a publisher in the UK. So you don't have to ask permission from a publisher to reproduce a story for a story walk, but they've actually negotiated with this publisher to have ready to go printable story walk pages that have the activity prompts and everything all ready to go. So it's a very all you have to do is have a printer and and a laminate, but it's a great way to get started and really have to not do much planning. It's all been done for you, so it's an easy way to try it out without having to do much investment. Lynette says this is a great idea. We have never done this, however we may try. What is the link? Let me see see why I'm sharing my screen right now, Rachel. I'm not sure if I can toggle to my browser to get that link, but I'll try to get it to you, or you can email me if you can't find it. But Emily, do you have any advice for people that are maybe think they'd love to get started but are understaffed? Do you have any thoughts about what you'd recommend for people that are trying to get started and on kind of a limited budget and with limited staffing?
Sure. I mean, I might recommend just a temporary story walk at first, whether it is with wooden spikes or garage sale signs and things like that, just to kind of get a feel for how long it takes, and to see if it's something you really want to invest your time in. And then you don't have to start like we started with several parks, maybe one park. And if you have some partners that you can work with, whether it's Parks and Rec or another partner in your library or outside of your library, so that maybe you can share the work. I know we get lots of requests from local authors and families and children to help with the story walk, and we haven't yet included volunteers in the process. We may eventually, but I think that could maybe help save some time. But I think first maybe I'd start with a temporary one, just to, if you're not sure about staff time or if you have enough people to help you, maybe just try a temporary one. You can still laminate it, put it on a garage sale sign and a stake somewhere, and see how that goes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Emily, and so that's actually something I'll be talking about in just a minute. But I would just emphasize and reiterate that a great way to get started is really just plant the idea, plant the seed among potential partners. So maybe you schedule a Zoom call with Parks and Recreation, or I'll suggest in a minute, maybe even downtown businesses, just say, hey, we're thinking about doing the story walk. We don't have the time or staff to do it all by ourselves. Would you all be interested in working with us to try to make it happen? So you could do a temporary story walk. Another way to get started is just to get the conversation started with potential partners who you may find are willing to do a lot of the legwork required to make it come to life, especially now during the pandemic when everyone's trying to think about what they can do outside. So just to continue on, I've been looking at this trend for 4 years, and what I've found is that there's 4 ways that we can combine kind of programming and walking. The one way is to connect stories and walking through things like a story walk. In a minute, I'll talk about the Walking Book Club. We can also highlight local cultural heritage and work with partners to create walking tours of arts, and we can see what walking initiatives are already happening in our communities and try to support them, maybe do some cross promotion of what's already happening. And we can also support safe routes to and from libraries by doing walk audits and really evaluating how accessible is our library for pedestrians or bicyclists. And so this is just this is actually from a few years ago, but I started this by in 2017, seeing how many libraries across North America had done story walks. So as Emily mentioned, this idea actually was developed in Vermont in 2007. And since then, it's really spread not only across North America, but really across the entire planet. So Emily did a lot talking about story walks, so I'm not going to spend much time here talking about that, but I do want to talk now about walking book clubs. So these next couple slides are actually from Danielle Henson, who recently retired from the Gail Borden Library in Elgin, Illinois. But back in 2009, she actually started a walking book club at her library. And this book club met weekly, every week up until the COVID-19 pandemic. So every week, a group of people would gather at the library to go on a 45-minute walk. So people would walk and talk about whatever. And then they'd have a cool down talk. So they would actually discuss the reading for the week in the library's meeting room. And they could talk about the book, or they could talk about whatever while they were out walking. Because because they realized it really didn't work that well to have an active book discussion during the walk. During inclement weather, they would use a walking track in an athletic facility across the street, and they had negotiated with them to be able to use the walking track at no cost. And so they broke the book into 4 segments. So by the end of the month, you had read and discussed the entire book. It was also a lot of library staff really liked it as well, because it gave them an opportunity to get outside and to get moving during the workday. And it also created opportunities, as I said, to form a partnership with a nearby recreation facility. So I don't know how feasible this program is currently during the pandemic, but I would definitely recommend considering a walking book club once things return more to normal. And so, as I mentioned, they did it on outdoor trails. They did it on indoor tracks. They utilized walk and bike paths. Sometimes they'd go to forest preserves. Really, if you don't have access to those facilities, you could do it as an outreach program at a mall. Any space where there's enough room for people to walk would be a space that you could use for a walking book club. And I'll just mention, so I've seen, I don't have a slide for this because I just discovered this, but libraries, so this library in Tennessee actually developed a really innovative twist on this idea. So they're doing a virtual walking book club where they encourage participants to download titles on Hoopla. So you download your audiobook on Hoopla, you go in and walk and listen to the audiobook kind of wherever you want. And then they just have their book discussion in Zoom. So you don't necessarily have to be walking while you listen to the audiobook, but they're encouraging folks to go out walking while they listen to the title and then discuss in Zoom. So there's a lot of ideas, ways you can do twists on this. If you are doing a walking book club in which people are actually gathering for it, you need to make sure that you collect people's emergency contacts, have them sign a waiver of liability, and of course, check on the weather. Pace yourself. You want to walk with the slowest person in the group. No one gets left behind. Trust the group to cooperate, facilitate, and build. Like I said, Danielle did this program for over 10 years at the Gale Borden Library, and she found that over the 10 years, it really became a community, and it was a community where people cared about each other. Again, they found it made the most sense to actually do the book discussion in the library's meeting room rather than out on the walk. Send reminders and use social media. And just a quote from one of the long-term participants, Valerie said, "The Walking Book Club brings a new idea to book clubs, which may appeal to folks with limited time who wouldn't have time to exercise, and also join a book club." So you're able to kind of meet 2 needs at one time, your need for literacy and reading and your need for exercise, and do it with a bunch of friends and people that you know and like. So that's so those are ways to connect stories and reading, the walking book club and the story walk. I'm going to move a bit more quickly through the next couple of examples. So we can also, libraries have been doing local history tours, doing mural walks. And in COVID times, maybe you don't want to get people physically gathered for these walks, but you could use mapping software to map out walking routes that highlight local historical sites or ghost sites, cemetery walks. This would be a great partnership to do with a historical society or a history museum or an arts council in your community. We can also support existing walking initiatives. So there's a national initiative called Walk with the Doc, which has chapters all over the country. But Denver Public Library has worked with them for the last 5 years to have a Walk with the Doc start and end at one of their libraries. So that would be something to look to when you, after COVID-19 runs its course, look to Walk with the Doc as a potential partner. If you have any STEPS challenge, that would be something the library could support. Safe routes to and from libraries. So I'm not going to spend too much time, but there's a national organization called the Safe Routes Partnership. And their whole thing is to try to make it safer and easier for people to walk and bicycle safely to schools, to parks, and now also to libraries. So it's really the idea that our libraries should be accessible to people, whether or not they're in a car or if they're walking or bicycling. So really librarians getting involved in promoting active transportation and complete streets. And this is just one example from the Palo Alto Library in California, where they worked with their town government and the Palo Alto Safe Routes to School partnership to generate this this map that's suggested walking and bicycling routes to and from the different branches in the city. So this would be another partnership that you could pursue, especially if you have any sort of active living or safe routes partnership in your community. Just one other quick idea I want to highlight is the idea of doing a walk audit. This is an example from St. Louis County Library, where they worked with their St. Louis County Older Residents Program to do a 1 mile guided walk focused on assessing the safety for pedestrians and in particular the safety for older adults in terms of the walkability. So this is a great way to combine citizen science with outdoor programming. So you're actually engaging your residents and using urban planning tools to assess how walkable and how bikeable the community is. And then you can then use that information generated by the citizen science to actually work with policymakers to promote, to propose changes to the built environment that would make your community more accessible for people of all ages and abilities. And this connects to the last thing that I want to talk about is how we in libraries can actually transform the built environments around us. We can not only create indoor spaces, we can actually play a part in transforming outdoor spaces. This is an example from Rochester, New York, where the Library of Rochester and Monroe County worked with a children's museum to create a play walk that connected the library and the museum. And it had like different outdoor musical instrument stations and a story walk, and just really a lot of fun stuff for children and families to experience as they walk between the library and the museum. I really love this example. This is so if you go to bike2books.com, this is an initiative of the Portland Bureau of Transportation with the Multnomah County Library. Every year for the last 5 years, including during 2020, they had a coloring art contest. And the winning design, as you can see here, is actually painted into the bike lane. So really encouraging people, families, children to see bike lanes as theirs. This is your space. This is the space for you. Everyone should feel safe bicycling. These roads are not just for vehicles, they're for bikes, they're for walkers. Everyone should feel safe biking and walking throughout the community. Just some more examples of things that libraries have done during the COVID-19 pandemic, doing things like chalk the walk. So if you have a sidewalk, do a socially distant chalk the walk, a downtown story walk. In some cases, actually using acrylic paint to do things like a sidewalk obstacle course. Really, the possibilities are endless. And just some more examples, a lot of you may be familiar with the bear hunt, which was really popular back in March and April of 2020. This library in Ohio had printable coloring sheets that folks could color in and place in their windows, just to illustrate their solidarity with the library and with healthcare workers and the fact that we're in this together, as it says here. And just as we do all these different initiatives, really our goals would be on increasing access. Now, I'm aware that this really doesn't apply to Florida, but up in the northern climates, a lot of libraries are checking out snowshoes. Perhaps in Florida, what would be applicable would be something like trekking poles or walking poles, which a lot of people find can really increase their balance and make it easier for them to walk. And as Emily said, a great way to get started is to actually think about who you could work with. So really get a little help from your little friends. we've seen across the country that libraries have been able to really get started with this programming by working with both Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. So these are images of Girl Scouts in New Jersey and New York who actually worked with their local library to help create story walks. So sometimes the easiest way to get started is just to plant a seed in people's head. Just put on your website, hey, we want to get a story walk started. Who wants to help us out? Sometimes it's really that simple, but you can't get anything going if you're not telling people that you want to be involved in transforming the built environment. So it really starts with saying, hey, we're going to do this, and who's ready to join us in making it happen. And so I mentioned, I put that link into Curiosity City, and here's Cat's Colors is the name of the title. So this Penn Public Library in New York is actually using it. So it's Cat's Colors by Arlie Anderson, and they have the activity prompts all ready to go. So it's a great way to get started. And again, you don't necessarily have to do it in a park. These are examples of libraries that partnered with local businesses to have the story walks posted in the windows of local businesses. And that makes it easier because then you don't have to worry about creating the installations, and you just need some tape. So if you can tape something to a window, bam, there's your story walk. It's that simple. And start small, and you don't know where it's going to lead you. And so I have been collecting some examples of more stories of this on my website, Let's Move in Library. So this is just one of the stories that we featured of a library in Pennsylvania that did a story walk and scavenger hunt as a way to keep their community engaged during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd encourage you all to stay connected, and if you're not already, to subscribe to the Let's Move in Libraries monthly newsletter, in which we try to highlight stories like this one. And so I just want to end by saying, so we've talked a little bit about actually in-person programming, and so just want to end by acknowledging that we are, of course, living in the COVID-19 pandemic, and not everyone is taking this as seriously as they should be. So it is safer to do things outdoors compared to indoors. And the smaller the group size and the more spread out they are, the lower the risk. But at the end of the day, if something doesn't add value but does add risk, reconsider whether or not it's worth doing. So that's all that I have for you. And so we have about 7 minutes. I eagerly await any and all comments and questions, either for me or for Emily. And let's see here. Yeah, so we have some time here for questions. So I'd love to hear what reactions people have. If you have any thoughts.
Yep, we do have a few minutes for questions.
Okay, I see.
They've been pretty active throughout, though. So.
Yeah, so Lynette has a really good idea. So she really likes the idea of a story walk with several other libraries together. And Lynette, that's a really good point. And in fact, I've seen increasingly, I've seen a lot of libraries actually develop story walks as a consortial program. So for instance, in Southwest Kansas, the Southwest Kansas Regional Library Cooperative actually developed story walk titles that any member of the cooperative or consortium can borrow. So after a library has gone through the work of laminating the pages, you can exchange the title with another library in your system. So yeah, I think the idea of kind of working together with other libraries in your area is a really great one. And Rachel says, during normal times, we have dance, yoga, and movement classes here at the library that are very popular. But since COVID, we haven't had any in person. So doing some on Zoom, but they aren't as popular as the ones at the library were. Yeah, that is, I mean, I think that is definitely a reality.
I think it's hard to just get the word out on some of these programs.
That's accurate as well. And so Emily, I'd actually be curious. So I know you have a lot of partners. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of how cross promotion may help get the word out? Does the different parks and recreation units that you work with, do they pump out information about the story walks, and have you found that to be helpful?
Yes, that's a great question. So we do, one of our parks in Pineville has an indoor space where we can leave rack cards, and they're always great to post things on Facebook. And we always try to share like feedback we get on story walks, good comments, suggestions with them as well. So yeah, the more we can get our partners to promote, the better. I think our best promotion was a few years ago. The Mint Museum had a exhibit by Tony DiTerlizzi, and they actually brought him to Charlotte a couple of times. And so we partnered with them. We didn't actually have to pay to have him, and it worked out that he could do a story walk. And so they promoted it at the Mint Museum, on their website, in their building, as well as we did too. So yes, I agree. The more that the partners can help promote, because they're the same families and people in the community, but it seems like the more different partners that are helping you promote, the more people you reach. So that's always a great idea.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Emily. And yeah, and I like how you also had a museum partner. I mentioned that library in Rochester, New York, also worked with a museum, and I think so when you think of cultural and educational institutions, they're all trying to reach the same audience, and the more that you're kind of working together, the more effective everyone's going to be at getting the word out. I saw Rachel had a comment about how in Florida, a lot of retirees live in Florida. So her library serves an older population who is not super tech literate. So I suggested in the chat you might want to consider a poetry walk, and I put a link in there. So I don't have a slide for this, but a poetry walk typically it has the same structure as a story walk. But rather than have kind of a children's storybook, you actually have poetry. So people walk and read poems, and so it's typically has a more adult audience. The poems aren't necessarily adult content, but there's just not the visually engaging content. It's just more words rather than images and words. And I know libraries have had a lot of success with poetry walks in Washington State and in Vermont and in elsewhere. So I think that's a good way to think about if you're thinking about trying to engage a more adult audience. A poetry walk could be something to consider.
It was a great job, Noah and Emily. I feel like my mind is stuffed with information now. You had a lot of information in there.
Yeah, great. No, I'm glad to hear, and I'll just speaking for myself and for Emily as well, I guess. Please, you have our email addresses here, so we'd love it if people have follow-ups to please reach out to us. I know I'd be more than happy to follow up, and yeah, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions as you think back over the content that we shared with you today.
Great. Well, thank you all for your active participation. We hope you enjoyed it, and thank you to Noah and Emily for putting this together. We hope to see you soon at another PCI webinar. Have a great afternoon, everybody.